Thank you very much. I think we'll just proceed immediately with Zainah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. This is the second time I've been on the Malaysian Summit. I was at the one in Boston at Harvard a few years ago, and that was, great audience and great questions from the students. Just hundreds of students from all over the US were there actually. And I really like the fact that you guys have discovered the preamble to the Rukun Negara, because I think it's far more promising and exciting and meaningful than the 5 principles actually. And there are words, I'm amazed that there are words that seem strange to us today, rather to the government of the day. Words like equality and justice, words like liberal, words like progressive. Today, these are considered bad words, but these are the words of the preamble to the Rukun Negara. And I really would like us to go back to these principles and these promises of a just and equal society, of a democratic society, of a liberal and progressive society, that in today's conservatism and climate of intolerance, are seen as, unnationalistic to believe in these values. What I want to talk about is, as a feminist, as an activist in the women's rights movement over the past 20 years, is really the whole issue of inequality and injustice towards women in this country. And if you look at the World Economic Forum, there's a gender gap, a global gender gap, and Malaysia has just been dropping in the ranks. In 2006, we were ranked 72. By 2010, we were down to 98 out of 134 countries. And Malaysia, at the international level, in terms of economic statistics, is considered a high middle income country. And yet our performance when it comes to women's rights, we're right at the bottom with the Arab and African countries. Why? So this is, and if you look at the data, if you look at, basically, and don't tell me how well women are doing in education. What is happening is that while women are doing well in education, over 62% of women are in the public universities. Private universities is more equitable. The investment in education is really not reflected in the outcomes in economic and political participation. And this is really a high cost to the country and to the nation's economic growth and well-being. And we truly want to be a developed nation by 2020. I really don't understand why this government, and it's not just the government, I must say the opposition parties, although some states are doing better than others, are not taking 50% of the talent in this country, 50% of the human resources in this country seriously. And you look at the percentage of women in parliament, there's only, first let me start, female labor force participation. We're only 46%, only 46% of women who should be in the workforce are in the workforce, compared to men, 80% of men. Compared to the countries like Laos, 82% of women are in the labor force. In Laos, Malaysia, in fact, is the lowest among ASEAN countries in terms of female labor force participation. And the government really needs to reflect on this when over 62% of university students are women. Why is this not reflected in employment? What are the reasons? If you look at women in political participation, there are only 23 members of parliament who are women out of 222. And that's only 10%. And again, Malaysia is the second lowest. Only Myanmar beats Malaysia in this. And that is really sad to be compared to Myanmar. And even in this day and age, Myanmar is just leaping forward with the opening up in terms of political, democratic principles and all that. So where only all the 9 other ASEAN countries are doing, 8 others are doing better than Malaysia. Only Myanmar is below Malaysia. In the state assemblies, it's even worse. We only have 46 women members out of 500 176. There are only 46. So I hope your party will do something in this coming election. So that's only 8% women in the state assemblies. 8%. And we are 50% of the population. You look at the ministers in the cabinet. Now there's only one woman cabinet minister after Dato' Shahrizad's resignation. And somehow there is this quota since independence, since 1957, there's never been more than 3 women cabinet ministers. And for the past few years it's been 2, and now we're reduced to 1. And that's, is equivalent to 8%. And deputy ministers, 42 deputy ministers, only 7 are women. So these are really disgraceful figures, for a country that is a high middle income country that believes in, transformation of the economy, transformation of the government, transformation of the country, that wants to be a developed country by the year 2020. And in fact, the government is committed to 30% women in decision-making positions by 2015. So that's really 2.5 years away. I don't know how the government is going to achieve, the government makes many pronouncements and goals and policy decisions, but the monitoring and implementation is just so bad. And we, the Rakyat, have very short attention span, and this is why this government has been allowed to get away with so much. And I think it's really high time with the elections coming up, that we put pressure on the political parties, not just the political parties in government, but the political parties, the opposition, and they're in power at the state level to really do far better with regard to women's participation. And if you look at the private sector too, it's really, really dismal in terms of women in the board. If you look at, banking, only 5.9% women in the boards of Malaysia's banks. If you look at the GLC, and I'm just looking at the data of the GLCs, 30 GLCs that are involved in the government's transformation program, and only 8.8% women. Of course, the Securities Commission has instituted a gradual policy over the next 5 years. They've got to have at least 30% women. And I really, a country that purports, that wants to join the ranks of the developed world in 8 years' time cannot continue to discriminate against half its population. And policies have to be in place, and monitoring, mechanisms have to be. If you have a policy, and I think this is where one of the shortcomings of Malaysia is that when we introduce new policies, we make these policy pronouncements, but there's no mechanism to monitor progress, to evaluate, is this policy working or not, to do a midterm review of the policy. Is it effective? Is it not effective? It's not effective, why? And this goes for, from the new economic policy, why hasn't the new economic policy achieved the goals that were set out to have been achieved in 30 years? And if it has not achieved the goals, how, do we redress, take remedial action? And this country so often, in the whole governing process, there isn't this monitoring of implementation and to change, tracks, should the policy fail to deliver on what it's supposed to deliver. And in terms of women, certainly if the government, wants 30%, that's minimum, that's not maximum, 30% women in decision-making position by 2015, it seriously has to look at all the data, and the data is there. That's another problem with policy making in this country too. We don't look at data. We have mounds of surveys, mounds of data generated by the statistics department, but I don't think the government is seriously looking at that data to make policy and to, redress the injustices and inequalities that take place. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much,